exposed the marginal price of emissions and penalised increases and rewarded decreases in emissions over time in every sector of the economy. When we left office, the price of carbon had gone up to about $24 at peak, I think around 20 generally. And it was already in effect in electricity, it was and transport essentially, and it was coming in industrial emissions and agriculture. The next government came in and they immediately effectively gutted the ETS. They introduced a price cap without a price floor. They said you only needed to remit a tonne of carbon emission rights for every 2 tonne of your emissions. So they halved the effectiveness of the price signal immediately. They then delayed and eventually excluded forever agriculture, which accounts for 50% of our emissions. So the effect of that economic price signal was diminished in those 2 decisions by 75%. So it wasn't nearly as effective as it ought to have been. Then they failed to respond to changes in the international negotiations on climate. We obviously can't cure the world's climate problems alone, and so we were part of international treaties through the Kyoto Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol disappeared. The international allocations into those international Kyoto frameworks were not adjusted, and Ukrainian and Russian hot air had nowhere to go in an economic sense except into the New Zealand ETS, because they were blocked from the only other major ETSs in the world, namely those in Europe. So that further diminished the effectiveness of the New Zealand ETS and took the price instrument down to a couple of bucks a tonne, so it didn't work. The government nonetheless left in place the ETS. They then belatedly moved to exclude those overseas units to the market, and then Paula Bennett, near the end of the term of government, also brought to an end the two for one, although the price cap was left there. So we inherited a system where the market was distrusting of it having a reliable future, and it wasn't nearly as effective. Now, James Shaw has done some good work to restore that. It's not perfect still. Agriculture still isn't in it. And He Waka Eke Noa, which is the alternative way to somehow include climate emissions in a system, hasn't been recorded in transport really until this government. And transport emissions have been growing and growing and growing, except just recently we've made progress in large part through the Clean Car Discount and the related Clean Car Standard. Now 50% of our cars, or 40 to 50%, depending on the month, of light vehicles that are being imported to the country are low carbon. They're low emissions. About 20% of those total imports now are EVs, and every month it goes up a bit and down by month, depending on the big shipments of EVs that come into the country. It varies a little bit, but roughly 20% per month are now pure EVs, and another 20 to 30% are either hybrids or very small vehicles that have got low emissions. The next challenge there is to make sure that you overcome range anxiety for people, and so Michael's currently got some work out there on the strategy for that, which is called Charging Our Future, and we're looking at how we fill in those gaps in our charging infrastructure in every small town, as well as along our roads. The ETS, because we've now got a decent price, is kicking up some significant money, which we're recycling as a government now. That's another initiative of this government through what we call the Climate Emergency Response Fund, the CERF, CERF, Climate Emergency Response Fund. And that funds different initiatives, for example, the Clean Car Discount, and also the government initiatives to decrease industrial emissions. It's called the GIDI Fund. I forget what the acronym is. I think it's government investment in. Anyway, it's effectively industrial emissions. And now that is making some very significant investments. Some of them initially were small, like getting rid of coal boilers and oil boilers in schools, which is largely complete now. some of it is really big, like trying to do deals with the major users of coal, like Fonterra, and those haven't been landed. And there's some other really good big initiatives in there that will become public soon, but I'm not free to announce today, which are effectively recycling that money that's coming through the ETS, where people have to pay for their emission rights, and we're recycling that money into reductions of emissions. We have remaining challenges in heavy transport. The technologies are not there yet, but Megan Woods is developing a hydrogen roadmap, and we're starting to see some initial investments, which will be one of the ways in which we decarbonise heavy transport. If I could flick there, and of course then we've got the other architecture. We've got an emission reduction plan, which came from government, but was preceded by an equivalent to that from the Climate Commission, which was obviously an initiative of this government to try and depoliticise some of these climate issues. The big challenges for me remain in agriculture. Very hard to get to a settled point there, as history shows. Emissions per unit of output on methane go down by roughly 1% per annum, just through efficiency improvements. Unfortunately, they've all been taken as volume growth until now. There is some good news in respect of nitrous oxide, which is of the half of our emissions that are agriculture, 2/3 is methane, 1/3 is nitrous oxide. Of that 1/3, part of it is nitrous oxide from urine from animals, and part of it is nitrogenous fertilizer. On the nitrogenous fertilizer, we've had 2 years of reductions of related emissions by 5% per annum. In fact, I think 12% over those 2 years. But that hasn't been driven by climate policy. It's actually been driven by water policy, which I will come to. Our other big environmental challenges include obviously biodiversity and water, and I'll cover water and then I'll shut up and answer some questions. In respect of water, we've made some huge changes in the last term, which are now starting to bear fruit, frustratingly slow though it is in terms of the environmental statistics that are reported historically. So we did a number of things. We moved against the most damaging environmental practices like intensive winter grazing and failing to have your waterways fenced. So intensive winter grazing is now a regulated activity. And if you do it in a way in accordance with the rules that are quite strict, then you can do it. If you don't, you need a resource consent. And through this process, we've actually seen both a decrease in the total quantity of it and an improvement in the way in which it is being carried out, which means that there's less sediment loss to waterways. We have required all waterways over time to be fenced, more of them. So if you're farming deer, cows, cattle, or pigs, you now require your waterways to be fenced. There is the occasional exception for that for a high country farm with a low intensity system, but essentially, if those animals are being farmed because they break down the banks and sediment gets into the water as well as animal excrement, you have to fence, and that's settled down. You can see that we've made that step as a society, and it's rolling out, and it seems to be a reasonably settled policy setting, which is improving water quality. Sheep don't have to be fenced out of waterways because they don't cause quite the same environmental damage. The next thing we did is that we've required all farmers to report their application of nitrogenous fertilizer, and we've imposed a maximum limit per hectare per annum that never existed. That is now enforced. Last year, there was, in terms of the reporting requirements, which required a software tool, which has been developed, including with cooperation of regional councils and the fertilizer companies. About only 40% of the farmers complied with that in the first year, but that's up from 0% the last year, and we're expecting to get probably... What's that? Sorry, I can you hear me still?
Yes, we can hear you. Keep going.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, shall I just finish this off? So that's actually that is probably what's behind this decrease in the use of nitrogenous fertilizer, which is a good thing. Slightly less intensive farming systems being used in some parts of the country. Farm regional council plans are being required to be updated. We changed the RMA to enable a process which involves independent water commissioners hearing those plan changes to make sure that they comply with the new requirements of the National Policy Statement on Freshwater Management. And those plans are starting to pop out. We've had the first of those instruments, or part of it, close to being heard in Otago, and they're increasingly being progressed. So I've got a message here from Jocelyn Harris. Am I keeping eye on the time? Shall we